Okay, everyone, I think we will get started with the introductions, and I'm sure other people will join as we go along. Thank you for joining our session. We're going to be talking about the inconvenient truths of water investments and pastoralist resilience. And this is meant to be a session in which we will present some of what we've been finding in our research and experience, but we also are really hoping for an exchange with many participants from many parts of the world that are attending this World Water Week. I'm Nancy Balfour, and I have with me as our panel Jackson Washira from the Center for Research in Drylands Development, Hussein Washira from also the Center for Research in Drylands Development, and Masresha Tai, all of whom were involved in the research in Kenya and Ethiopia. We, in the spirit of making this an interactive session, we would like to engage you in a little exercise while we are going through the session. And I'm just going to open a whiteboard that has some photographs on. Charlotte, can we go to the next slide and then we'll be able to see what this is all about? So, okay, I think I'm not able to open that whiteboard just now, so we'll open it a bit later. But the plan for the session is as follows. This is the introduction. Then we're going to show a short video with parts of our field work and some of what we have been finding, and then some slides on the sort of summary conclusions that bring all of that together. And then hopefully for the rest of the session, about half the session, we will have a plenary interaction with the panel I've just introduced. Next slide, please, Charlotte. So the exercise we want you to engage in is we want captions for some of our photographs. Okay, so I have 3 photographs. This is the first one. Next one, please, Charlotte. And then the next one after that is that one. Okay. We would like suggestions of captions for those photographs. I was hoping to be able to activate a whiteboard, but it seems it will stop the sharing. So I don't think I can activate that at the same time as we're doing the video and the sharing. So I'll activate the whiteboard for you to add there. But if you have ideas also of these 3 photos, Charlotte, we can go over them again. Then please put them in the chat for now, and we'll open the whiteboard later. Charlotte, can we just go back and go over those 3 photos again? Yeah, that's photo 2. That's photo 1. So ideas for captions, they can be comical, or they can be just an interpretation of what you think you're seeing. And at the end, we will explain what these actually were, and also maybe award a prize for the best caption. Okay? Let's continue, Charlotte. Next slide, please. Maybe we're going to go to the video next, I think, please. We set out with 2 objectives: to interrogate the narratives that new water supplies in fragile areas build resilience for households and communities, and also to explore whether current resilience and climate change adaptation policy and practice reflects the evidence of impact of new water supplies. We chose 2 areas to do the actual field work, and we chose very deliberately. We chose Gashama Wareda in Somali region in Ethiopia, which uniquely was an area where UNICEF had drilled new deep boreholes using advanced technology for that, in an area where there was no permanent water supply before 2017. So that was a very interesting case study. And then we went to Marsabit County in Kenya, which is also an interesting area in that it's a huge geographic area, but with relatively small population. And 20 years ago, there were probably only 10 permanent water supplies, and now there's 120. So there's been a massive expansion of permanent water supplies and settlement that comes with that.
There are a couple of key issues that compromised the existing resilience strategy by pastoralists, the local strategies that they have been put in place as a result of this new water development. The first one is actually it increased settlement around new water supply areas. Initially, they were sparsely populated. However, because of these water supplies, and they are not, one thing we need to take into account is that they are not owned by that community, but rather they are regarded as a public good by the state or other development actors. As a result, there is a loose ownership of these water supplies, which means all others can come from different areas and settle in areas where there is this water supplies. This created, let me say, two or three major challenges. The first is in most of these villages by the local community, they have dry season stock for their livestock. But when most pastoralists from other areas migrate or move to these new water supplies without a proper planning, it affects, in most cases, destroys the dry season reserve they have. So this created tension among in quote unquote the host and the incoming community. The second one is that because of the most people are coming and settling around these water areas, for the government it became quite easier to provide some social services like school or health facilities without proper planning and consultations. This again increases more settlement to come. So that not only affected the different pastoral resources, which were originally shared based on the local resource sharing mechanisms, but also it created some sort of tension among the two. So in general, this is one key, I would say, failure in terms of new water supply and the increasing settlement that was not planned.
The question of salinity emerged very strongly in our study, and especially in the lowlands of Marsabit County, for instance. And in this case, the lowlands are the areas that are more drier and they are, more arid. And, people talked about, their water being, very, very saline, and the impacts were that they experience, a stomachache, they experience diarrhea, and regarding the politics of water management, that also emerged, and what we found is that the development of new water supplies result in a quite contested space. And for instance, as a precondition or as a condition for the establishment of new water supplies, actors often require that communities constitute what is typically called a water management committee. And a water management committee, basically also involve replacing the traditional water management regimes in these communities. The result has been quite some tussles between water users and the water committees around the effectiveness of the management of the supplies. And we also noted an increasing trend of individualization of water supplies, and in this case, some people get alienated or marginalized in the process of water use, and generally has resulted into a space of conflict and contestation.
Going forward, one key aspect is understanding the community should be the priority of development actors. This is to say, beyond uh, bringing on board the community in terms of consultation, mostly what they do is that, is there a water shortage? Everyone would say, yes, there is a water shortage. Do you want one? All will say yes. That's where this consultation stops. However, it should go beyond identifying suitable areas for the water development, access issues, planning and management and reconstruction. It should be a comprehensive consultation that should take place. The second one is the intended and the unintended impact of this water supply should be understood. I mean, there are ample research, and one of the study we have conducted is to provide policymakers and development actors to actually understand the unintended impact of this water supply. So understanding these two, the intended and the unintended impact of water supplies, is quite important. The third one is water quantity by itself is not the final, should not be the final strategy, but rather quality, sustainability, and reliability is an important element, which in this different sites that we visited was compromised. One classical example is the high salinity content of the water affecting the health, and at times community totally living from using this water supply is one. So this is the third one. And the fourth one is engaging the state is quite important, but also understanding clan relationships, resource sharing modalities is quite important. It should go beyond supplying water, but rather how it is linked with other pastoral resources. What are the local community structures and how we can increase the community's ownership in managing and utilizing the resources is quite important.
Now, I think it's very important that actors understand that pastoralism remains, the cornerstone of the household economy, the regional economy, of communities in the drylands. So, developing new water supplies in areas where they traditionally migrated to results in erosion of their drought coping capacity. So it would be helpful if actors were able to be faithful to that practice and avoid development of water supplies in areas that pastoralists traditionally relied on for grazing.
I think what our research shows is that there's a real absence of thinking about the broader landscape, thinking on a landscape level about pastoralist livelihoods and how the use of land resources and water resources are interlinked, and how there should be some long-term planning on the use of grazing and water in a broad area, rather than these sort of individual decisions about a water supply. And I think that came clearly from the pastoralists we spoke to as well, that that's something that they're looking for, that they do on a daily basis. But these new water supply developments, driven by, good intentions, that they are some extent undermining those pastoralist systems, and there needs to be much more integrated and holistic thinking about resource management and pastoralist systems. Thank you, Charlotte. We're going to move on. I mean, that was a sort of snapshot of what we saw, what we found in the field. We were, if it wasn't clear in the video, we were looking at Ethiopia, Somaliland region, Somali region in Ethiopia, and also Marsabit County in Kenya. I'm just going to show a sort of quick summary of what we've concluded from these findings so far, before we open it up for a broader discussion, because we have some very experienced people with us and participating in this session, and really like to hear from them as well. So Charlotte, can we just show the slides on the conclusions? Thank you. Yeah. There we go. So we're framing the conclusions at the moment under these two kind of headings of inconvenient truths and trade-offs. So under the inconvenient truths, we've sort of grouped conclusions around livelihoods, and you heard a bit about that in the video. What we heard from pastoralists was that their experience in this very severe drought that we've just been through in this region is that those with a permanent water supply didn't necessarily fare any better than those without. Now, while that's a rather controversial statement, what it really highlights is that it's an interlinked system, and water supply on its own, permanent water supply on its own, is not enough to provide resilience to drought. Then the other thing we were finding was that the main livelihood resilience strategy, mobility, has been undermined to some extent by permanent water supplies. So we're finding those impacts on mobility, coping, herd management, rangeland, and settlement. Politics and social differentiation, we'll talk about this a bit more in the panel session, I hope. We did find that there is a trend of politicization, commodification of water supplies, and what that's tending to do is increase the gaps between the haves and the have-nots, and increase the vulnerability of the ones who do not have access to those power hierarchies. Salinity, you heard a bit about. We'll talk about it a bit more. It was to some extent an unexpected finding, but it severely undermines the resilience because of health and well-being outcomes that are not met by new water supplies in these areas. Next slide, please, Charlotte. So what we've found really is that these many projects that have been implemented in this landscape in the Horn of Africa that have claimed to be providing resilience, that it has resulted in a series of trade-offs. The trade-offs really, the big ones are around the quality and availability. People have got more water. People have settled around more water, and that has made life a lot better, particularly for women in terms of the distances that they have to go to collect water. But a lot of that water is expensive to produce, and the quality is not as good as we would have hoped for. And people are choosing not to use that water when they have an option. Water scarcity versus resilience. The new water supplies deal with the water scarcity issue. They don't necessarily create resilience on their own. It is a very complex system. And what we were talking about in the video, I think particularly Mashresha was talking about this, is the fact that you need to look at the interlinked parts of the system, and you need the reliability, and you need the grazing systems in place. Related to that, static versus dynamic systems. Water development tends to be a static resource model, but pastoralism is a very dynamic system, relies on temporal and spatial distribution of resources, and that key mobility that we talked about before. So the two key framings of our conclusions are, as I said, around inconvenient truths and the trade-offs. Some preliminary ideas about how we might solve some of these quite wicked problems are in the next slide, please, Charlotte. Systems thinking. Bringing stakeholders together around systems analysis to get a better understanding of how the pastoralist systems are used and how resources are dynamic and variable in space and time, and making that part of our planning process. So integrated resource planning, where we're looking much broader at what natural resource management plans look like. None of this is really new, but are we really doing it? And are we doing it at a wide enough scale? This doesn't necessarily stick to administrative boundaries in terms of pastoralist systems. So moving beyond those administrative boundaries and looking at more flexible systems. One of those flexible systems might be looking at water supply, particularly boreholes, as a contingency that can be opened or closed. So it's not permanent. It's not open all the time. And that's, again, something that's been tried. It requires extremely good management, but it can be done. politics and conflict, working on the accountability and reliability of government technical support and of community management systems, and bringing a much greater role to the indigenous management systems that have been very effective in some areas. And then finally, something we again talk about but don't do very well is adaptive learning. So in our programs, can we build in after action reviews? Can we really understand what's happening in the landscape after we have done a water intervention? I think this is still lacking. Some of the areas we looked at were had new water supplies recently developed since 2017. But the fact that those water supplies are providing saline water or that they weren't reliable during the drought wasn't known by the people who put them in place. So that going back and taking stock and lesson learning. So those are some of our initial ideas. We'd now like to open it up for your questions and interventions and engagement. I'm also going to open a whiteboard with the photos that I showed at the beginning. If any of you want to try and contribute to the photo competition. So let's see if we can just open that up. Please feel free to ask questions. You can put your hands up or type questions in the chat, and my colleagues on the panel will be able to answer some of that. Thanks, Barbara, for your comment in the chat. Yeah, pointing out that some of this holds for the settled communities as well as in the pastoralist areas. Yes, I agree. I agree. Thank you for that, Barbara. Other questions, comments, colleagues?
Vanessa is raising her hand.
Great. Vanessa, go ahead, please. Vanessa, can you hear us? We can't hear you.
Perhaps she should write it in the chat.
Yeah, Vanessa, if we can't hear you, so do just write it in the chat. Yeah. Anybody else got any questions? Do feel free to add captions to our photographs. Try and use the color scheme. So add a sticky note with the right color for the right photo. Otherwise, just type in the chat if you want to add something to the photographs. Anybody else got any questions? I can't see Vanessa's question still. Jonathan. Jonathan's asking, what approaches are we looking at to integrate water resource planning with rangelands pasture management? And what contingencies for shutting down water supplies when pasture needs to be rested? Hussein, do you want to talk about the more integrated water resource planning and some of the work that you're doing at the moment?
Yeah, thank you, Jonathan, for that question. Definitely, one of the things that has already been mentioned also in the chat is the point of starting from what the community already do, your customer institutions that manage not only water, but in relation to the pasture. A lot of times when we consider these resources, we sometimes fail to see that the linkage this one resource directly has on the other. And when you're taking water and just water management, then forgetting about the rangeland that serves the pastoralist communities is always a challenge. So basing this on customer institutions and building on what they already know and what they do is important. And we have seen in places like, for example, Isiolo in northern Kenya, where, these customer institutions have had these contingency boreholes that the customer institutions hold the key and they determine when this is open. And they usually say only during the drought time that we can open this. But again, due to political interferences, settlements coming up, this breaks down also in certain contexts. So the contingencies there it's possible, particularly to control access through well-grounded institutions. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Hussein. Tameni is asking about other water supply options. Mashresha, do you want to talk about what we saw in Gashamo in terms of the traditional water supplies and how they were being used, and we saw some of that in the video as well.
A few points in clarifying my question, please.
I'm sorry?
May I add in clarifying my question so that we can share a good discussion on that?
Yes, go ahead.
You see, the experience that we have in terms of intervention in the pastoralist area as we implement water supply system, we were observing a kind of partial settlement. It's not partial permanent settlement. Part of the family members stay where the water supply system is there, and other, especially men who travel with cattle or to other area in terms of rangeland, grazing land search. So it is a way of life. Pastoralist is a way of life that we cannot avoid, and they move depending on the resource search. But this water supply system was considered as an opportunity in terms of having a partial settlement where you can have even other sectors like education and partly some kind of farmyard agricultural practices being practiced. So it was considered as an opportunity in terms of this way, than a challenge towards their moving way of life. So how do you see it, a bit of other dimensions that your research is indicating? Over to you.
Thanks, Tameni, for that clarification. I'm still going to turn to Mashresha, I think, to answer that because it touches a lot on what he found in Gashamo. Mashresha.
Okay, thanks, Nancy, and thanks everyone for the comments. Probably one of the things in terms of advocating and going forward, we should actually rethink the development narratives that we have in the pastoral system. As we all know, pastoralism inherently follows the spatial and temporal distribution of resources. So, as Tamene mentioned, having this type of water supply is not always a temporary settlement pattern, but what we are seeing, Kabbales or local administrations being built, school and the likes being built around those areas, so that will then turn into a permanent settlement. And in the last maybe 5 years in the Somali region, the number of local administration have increased by more than 45% from what it was in 2014 and 15. This also indicates that definitely these types of interventions have actually increased settlement pattern beyond temporary settlement. So that is not the issue, but rather having a comprehensive, as Nancy mentioned earlier in her concluding remarks, is that a comprehensive planning that cuts across these key issues is quite important, but rather what we have been seeing currently, these water supplies are actually intended with the supply of water without actually considering the broader implication it will have. The reason pastoralists remain in a pastoral
under
system.
Our approach, the model helps guide the conversations.
Sorry.
Oh, yeah,
So,
Mashresha.
yeah, so is that they understand the suitability
really
of
happen
the area,
to build consensus.
the suitability of the dry land for pastoralism. There are a lot of cases put in agriculture have actually compromised the environment. So this is broadly a way of response to Tammene. Nevertheless, this doesn't mean that all interventions by the state or other development actors have actually compromised. But when they are designed by blending or linking into the existing resource sharing modalities of pastoralism, have actually proved to provide a sustainable water supply and a harmonized way of resource sharing mechanism. Just to give one example, in Somali region around Gashabo, there was an open or a pond built by the community, and they have been using for years as a way of dry season water supply. When the government comes in, it comes not at a typical top-down approach, but rather, what can we do about this water supply? That was the question, which the community responded, what it can be done. Unlike the typical borehole supply, this one was done in a way it requires minimal or semi-spill from the community. So the sustainability and reliability was achieved as a result of that minimal intervention by the government. And second, the ownership and management style, unlike the typical WASHCO where the state would establish a committee to manage the resources, this one was left for the local community to use and share. As a result, the local resource sharing mechanism was not compromised. So what kind of water supply? Then a water supply that actually takes into account the need of the pastoralists, their indigenous community, and their modalities of resource sharing mechanism is a way forward, rather than a typical high spill type of water supply. It is something that we are seeing a bit of compromising the resilience building of the community.
Thanks very much, Mashresha. That was a good comprehensive answer. Vanessa has put a very good question in the chat, asking about whether we have examples of where this kind of more integrated management has actually worked. I think that's what the question is, Vanessa, and pointing out that some of these plans, regional management plans exist and spatial plans exist, but they're not really controlling settlement, which I think is very true. I can only offer up on that one, and I'll ask my colleagues to come in as well. But we have tried this at a conservancy level in Kenya to do more landscape resource management, looking at settlement, looking at the grazing plans, looking at the water development plans, and looking at the management of all of that, and trying to link the management, because that's one of the fundamental problems at the moment, is the water management is delinked from other natural resource management. I still think that there's potential for that, but there is a lot of disconnect on how the kind of, as we said before, around the spatial and temporal way that these kind of plans are made, and they don't actually overlay very well. So water resource management plans are done at a catchment level. Grazing plans tend to be done at a conservancy or administrative boundaries level, and none of these really match up particularly well with pastoralist systems. So to me, we've still got quite a long way to go in terms of working with pastoralists on their systems and their spatial and temporal resource management, and matching our external interventions more closely to that. Colleagues, Masresha, Washira, Hussein, anything to add to that?
Yeah, Nancy, thank you. I could just add a point, and I would want to pick up from the question that Temene asked, and Masresha, of course, responded quite comprehensively. And the question really was, what other options exist if the boreholes are opening up, areas traditionally utilized for grazing. And I think our study does show that one of the options is for us to undertake better consultation with the communities that are affected, because it's not one or two places we went, and people indicated that they were not adequately consulted before that facility was actually set up. And what we found is that as a result of that, communities are pushing back against some of these investments. If they are convinced that a new water supply is going to open up an area for migration and grazing during untimely times, or even opening up spaces for conflict, they just sort of even go to the extent of sabotaging it, or even destroying it, or refusing actors to go on adding value to them in the form of solarization, for instance, and of course that becomes a whole lot of lost investment. So other than really just having an alternative to water supplies in fallback areas in the drylands, one way is actually to consult and perhaps not do it, because as some of our respondents said, they would comfortably do with some and not others in context of the high variability of the areas. And in terms of the examples of where we could find this integrated kind of bridge management, I think we've got quite classic cases in Kenya as well, in the county in northern Kenya called Isiolo. Our experience and research shows us that by having the sort of the indigenous rage management kind of framework strong, and that is the other council of elders, who work very closely with more conventional actors and state and non-state actors, but also integrate the more traditional actors as well, like the Aba Erega, who traditionally in the Borana community, for instance, have been responsible for the management of water. We've seen that really contributes to the sort of the ability of particular communities to withstand drought conditions. I mean, without that, in the recent drought in this region, that region could possibly have suffered a lot more, because they started experiencing failed rain season much earlier than the other areas. So I think that speaks into more and more integrating the institutions themselves, and in a way that brings together not just the water, but also the broader context, in which case this is in this case it's the rangelands. Thank you.
Thanks, Washira. Anybody else got any questions or want to come in on any of the issues? We haven't discussed salinity very much, and it really is an emerging problem, and one that I think is not, we're not fully understanding what the solutions to that are yet. So if anybody's got some similar experience, they've been finding that this is a growing problem, and or they've got solutions or seen some promising ideas, then it would be good to see that. Anybody, any thoughts on salinity? Okay, maybe Washira, you can say a bit more about how that seems to be playing out, or the extent of the problem in Marsabit. It might be interesting to hear a bit more about that, and why don't we hear more about salinity in the sort of results and plans and projects that we're familiar with in drought-prone areas?
Yeah, thanks, Nancy, for that. And I think I did speak to that in the video. The question of salinity is quite prevalent in Marsabit County, and especially in the lowlands. These are the areas that lower altitude and they are drier and they are, you know, these are the areas far away from the highlands. And in the context of counties like Marsabit, that's really the county. That's the whole county. It's up to possibly 90% of the land is in the lowlands. And the people that we spoke to talked about wide-ranging health implications when they consume water that is of high salinity. Some people talk about diarrhea. Some talk about severe stomachache. Some people talked about just abandoning the consumption of that water altogether because they also do experience sensation in the sort of the reproductive systems or the respiratory system. And the programmers and practitioners we talked with do seem to appreciate that challenge exists. And as a matter of fact, in Kenya, before a borehole is commissioned or it's authorized, a water quality test needs to be undertaken. And some of the water quality tests that we have had access to just show certain, very high levels of chemicals. So it looks like then it's a dilemma amongst development practitioners that they do need to provide water, and they know the water is highly saline, but there aren't many ways to solve that. But unfortunately, then the systems fall into disuse, but they also have long-lasting impact on people's health. And part of the challenge could be that it's so prevalent that what solutions exist. If it's affecting almost 90% of the whole region, what solutions exist? And I think this shows the urgency of the need to identify a solution to the problem, because clearly, in as much as it's been documented and filed, that conversation has just not been happening. Over.
Thanks very much, Washira. I'm sorry about the whiteboard. It looked a little bit like somebody had managed to wipe out the whiteboard. So let's see if we can get it back again. Yeah, it looks like the photos have disappeared somehow. We'll come back to the photos. We'll put the slides up again before the end of the session. But I just want to come to the issue that we sort of mentioned briefly, but didn't go into any detail. And I'd like Hussein to talk about this a bit more, about the sort of politicized management and undermining resilience. So Hussein, what are we seeing in terms of who is really making decisions about water supply development, and why is this a problem in the context of resilience and pastoralism?
Yeah, thank you, Nancy. I think one thing that I want to quickly mention is when we talk about decisions, on water development, it boils down to who holds the resources and who has the leverage of making decision on these resources. I'm speaking from Kenya, so from experience, particularly, with resources from the government, politicians usually wield a lot of influence in terms of determining the allocation, to different sectors, as including water, and also then finally determining the location of these water resources. And often when, for instance, resources are allocated to a particular area, politicians will come in with their political lens to decide where this water will be installed. And this, for instance, has already been mentioned. It can come in terms of, what is the interest in terms of territorial claim, by politicians through the ethnic entities. So establishments of settlements will follow, water being developed in an area of interest where they want to keep this claim. And also on even resources that are controlled by non-governmental organizations, politicians definitely also have some influence on this, because they are among the decision makers. They control a lot of the constituents, their supporters who are being approached on the ground in terms of where these resources are located. They have this influence as well. And when it comes to these decisions, particularly boreholes, the element of governance then also comes in. And because there's this element definitely at the background. When it comes to governance, we have this people wanting formal systems, that can, quotes in quotes, what can I say? That can be accountable, that can, run these resources efficiently, that can maintain these resources. And a lot of times we run to, the policies and the frameworks that are there. And often these frameworks do not adequately consider, what institutions are already there and what have they been doing and how do we build on that. So we come up with these parallel institutions that run this water. And one element that comes with this is the essence of ownership of these resources is diluted compared to, the water points that are done through, customary institutions. And this goes into sustainability. And this has been demonstrated by, when you look around these boreholes, when they break down, maintenance is always by non-governmental organizations or the governments. And this is also as a result of rampant corruption that comes up within these new governance institutions that are set up. And also, as already been mentioned, management wrangles do come up. And this is not really observed within the customarily managed wells and water pans, as even given example by Masresha, for example, from Somali region of southern Ethiopia. So I think who makes the decision and not really considering, again, the local institutional frameworks is at the center of this resilience aspect not being achieved with these water resources. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks very much, Hussein. I mean, it's not to say that we think that indigenous organizations and management is not also open to the same problems of corruption. But I think what we found in this and other research that we've done in the area is that the way that we look at water management systems at the moment is very narrow. We have like a few models that we're kind of fixed on. And in the case of Ethiopia, there's, a prescribed model, and we know they're not really working. And so perhaps looking a bit more wider and having a more hybrid system is one of the solutions, really understanding who the users are and what kind of resource management would be affected. Masresha, did you want to add something?
Yes. Just one of the things, I mean, most of working in the pastoral system, you might have read Emery Roy on reliability professionals. As you know, everywhere in the pastoral system, the community has these types of reliability professionals. And when we talk about the politicization of new water supply, creating different power dynamics among those who are closer to the state and among these reliability professionals is one of the trade-offs actually in this water supply. In Somali region, it was really interesting. There was one or two boreholes that were left by the community because of the salinity issue. But these leaders or local intellectuals have been sidelined in the last 10 or 15 years as a way of consultation or identifying where are the areas that they can actually do this type of water supply. But now when the community realizes that, okay, this new water supply provided water in terms of quantity, but it's not something that is sustainable and that has a good quality, let's go back to our ancestral knowledge. By the time they go, then that is lost. So which means one of the unfortunate issue that we observed and what most actors in this area missed is that pastoralists have that knowledge. If we think of the whole of the region, they have been getting water, despite it was vulnerable, like I said, spatially and temporally, but they built a mechanism where and how to access water. And they have a better knowledge of which area has a better quality water than others, but they were never been consulted when these water supplies are constructed. So it created two different types of governance and power dynamics affecting the entire system in terms of building resilience. So these are the things. I mean, if you go to southern Ethiopia, northern Kenya, the Borana system of water access is locally built, but they know which one has a good quality and which doesn't have. In the Somali, in Afar region in Ethiopia, have similar issues. But that knowledge is completely sidelined. So this is one of the trade-offs and something that we should take into account in the future in terms of bringing the local knowledge, context, and systems and institutions when we think of supplying water to the community.
Thanks, Mashasha. That's great. We only just have 5 minutes left. So I'm going to ask if anybody else in the meeting, any of the participants would just like to make a final comment or a final question. Otherwise, I'm going to go to back to the pictures just before we end. Yeah, Vanessa's adding something on the politicization. It's certainly an issue that I think is going to keep coming up, and it, in a way, links into the issue about why and how we can do better landscape planning and resource management. Karen, I'd be very interested to hear more about your experiences in Niger. We're a little bit out of time, but please feel free to reach out and message me through the World Water Week platform. I'm available. It'd be nice to hear a bit more about Niger. So back to the pictures. Now, unfortunately, about halfway through the meeting, somebody wiped out all the pictures and all the captions. But I don't know whether Simon managed to see some of them or had some ideas. Otherwise, I can summarize quickly. Simon?
I did see what the captions. What was interesting, but not entirely surprising, Nancy, in the way you chose the photographs, is that some of the captions actually didn't match precisely because the photos aren't always pictures of what people might think the pictures are. So I think it's probably a good idea, Nancy, if you kind of quickly say what the pictures are and what they're not. Yeah. That might be good.
Yeah, absolutely. So the one on the far left of your screen at the moment, which looks a little bit like a spaceship, is actually an incomplete water supply, or a water supply. It would have been a raised tank, and the construction was stopped. And in this case, the story behind that, if I've got this right, Masresha, is that there was a change in the politics and the power structures in the region halfway through this construction, and so the investment was no longer going to that community, it was going elsewhere. So it was not ever completed. So there's a story behind every picture, and we are going to be publishing something on that in the next few weeks as well. So that's that picture there. The middle picture with the lots of technology is, as some of you pointed out, a desalination plant. This is one of the new generation of desalination plants that come in a container. And this is from a community in Marsabit. It is extremely complex, and it was not working when we visited this particular community. However, again, there's a story behind every picture, and it does seem as if we want to provide water to people and pastoralists, we are going to have to deal with the salinity issue. And I feel like, as somebody else pointed out in the chat, we need an awful lot more research on that, on the implications for health of both livestock and people, and on the technologies that are available, and sustainable in this context, because this very complex system certainly has its challenges at the moment. And then the final one on the far right is also interesting. Somebody labeled it soup. I think someone else thought it was a runoff system. Interestingly enough, what this actually is a picture of a homegrown solution by this particular community in Gashamo in Somali region, because the deep borehole that was drilled as a solution to there being no permanent water supply in this region is both saline and hot. So it's a typical feature of deep groundwater exploration that the water comes out hot. And in this community, they're basically taking the clean, clean saline, but potable water and putting it into an open reservoir to make it cool enough to use. So again, probably negating the provision of potable water that was originally intended. So those are three that I chose just to spark a bit of interest. But we have many more, and the debate and the discussion on this hopefully will go on. It's an interesting topic, and I think we have more problems than solutions at this point. So we really welcome engagement from all of you. Let me thank my panelists, Mashresha, Hussein, Washira. Thank you so much, and thanks for your excellent research. And we look forward to seeing you at another event. And please be in touch if we can exchange a bit more from other countries. Would really like to do that. Thank you all very much.
Thanks, Nancy.
Thanks, Nancy. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.